Do not embarrass me. His voice was a harsh, venomous whisper, but his fingers digging into the hidden bruises on my wrist cut straight through the elegant hum of the Maryland governor's mansion. We had just cleared the coat check. He yanked me closer, his grip tightening until my bones ached against the thin silk of my evening gown. Keep your mouth shut tonight. Keep your boring disaster stories to yourself. Do not make me look stupid. I need this $500,000 donation. I looked down at his perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around my arm. In the past, a threat like that would have sent a cold shiver down my spine. My stomach would have dropped into my shoes. I would have nodded eagerly, shrinking myself down to fit into whatever tiny, silent box he demanded. Tonight was entirely different. I locked my jaw. I let the sharp sting in my wrist anchor my focus. I looked up into his arrogant, perfectly polished face and forced a bright, obedient smile. I nodded once. He let go, entirely satisfied, adjusting his silk tie as if he already owned the entire room. He strutted ahead to greet his wealthy donors. I stayed one step behind, my fake smile never wavering. He thought he had me completely under his thumb. He had absolutely no idea he was already a dead man walking. I had already lit the match. Tonight, his entire political empire was going to burn to the ground. Devlin pasted on his $1,000,000 political smile the second the first donor approached. He jerked me forward by the elbow. He skipped over my name entirely. He erased my title as a Senior Director of Crisis Management at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. He laughed loudly and told the group of men I was simply the woman who kept his calendar straight. The wealthy donors chuckled, a patronizing, dismissive sound that scraped against my eardrums. I stood there, 38 years old, managing national disasters for a living, being reduced to a glorified secretary. I watched him puff out his chest, soaking in their adoration. A sick knot twisted in my stomach. The powerful state senator standing in front of me used to be a terrified, low-level staffer. He used to collapse on our cheap linoleum kitchen floor, burying his face in his hands, weeping about being a complete failure. I loved him. I pitied him. I gave up every promotion, stunting my own career to take a quiet government desk job just so I could secretly write his speeches. I mapped out his entire political climb. I handed him the playbook to success. But the moment he tasted real power, his deep-seated insecurity mutated into a raging, uncontrollable narcissism. I realized too late that I had manufactured my own abuser. The bruises hidden under my long silk sleeves throbbed, a sharp reminder of the monster he had become. Just 2 weeks ago, we hosted an intimate dinner party for his top campaign aides and our so-called closest friends. I poured the expensive red wine. My hand slipped slightly. 3 drops splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth. Devlin stood up, grabbed his heavy crystal glass, and hurled it directly at the wall beside my head. The crystal exploded on impact. A jagged shard sliced across my cheek. Warm blood instantly trickled down my jawline. The dining room went entirely still. His sycophant chief of staff and our friends stared down at their medium-rare steaks. They pretended the shattered glass on the floor was invisible. They ignored the blood dripping from my face. They gently sipped their drinks, nodding politely when Devlin sneered and ordered me to clean up my useless mess. Once the last guest finally left, I demanded an explanation. Devlin shoved me hard against the hallway wall, pinning both my wrists above my head. His breath smelled like aged scotch and pure malice. He leaned in and blamed me for his violence. He hissed that my pathetic, gloomy attitude forced him to lose his temper. He told me that without his important last name, a smelly bureaucrat like me would be absolute trash in this society. He thought he broke me that night. He thought pinning me to that wall proved his absolute dominance. He broke my skin. But he snapped my invisible chains right along with it. As I stand here, in this glittering ballroom, watching him sip champagne and lie to his donors. My mind is perfectly clear. The obedient, terrified wife died on that hallway floor. The crisis strategist woke up, and a crisis strategist knows exactly how to neutralise a disaster. 3 days before this gala, Devlin threw a 200-page hurricane relief dossier straight at my chest. The heavy binder hit my collarbone and crashed to the floor, scattering confidential federal documents across our living room rug. He needed a brilliant pitch to secure the $500,000 funding tonight. But he was too lazy, and frankly, too uneducated, to understand complex logistical routing. He stood over me, demanding I summarise the entire disaster response protocol into neat little bullet points so he could sound like a genius. He ordered me to use big words. He warned me not to humiliate him. I knelt down, smoothing out the crumpled papers. I used the exact brain he constantly belittled to build his coffin. I crafted an absolute masterpiece of a speech. I packed the pages with gorgeous political rhetoric, soaring promises, and aggressive buzzwords. It read like the declaration of a visionary leader. But buried inside that beautiful prose, I planted absolute, catastrophic, mathematically impossible data. I intentionally wove in glaring legal violations and logistical absurdities. I drafted a plan to route heavy emergency vehicles over a condemned suspension bridge. I proposed siphoning the state's primary drinking water budget to fund a non-existent coastal barrier. Any official with basic government clearance would instantly recognise the plan as fraudulent idiocy. I masked the poison in the exact kind of pompous language Devlin loved to hear himself say. I printed it out, placed it on his mahogany desk, and handed him a loaded gun. He glanced at the bold headings, praised his own ability to delegate, and memorised every single flawed statistic without a single question. Now, standing in the shadows of the governor's ballroom, I take a slow sip of ice water. The clinking of silver forks stops. The crowd of elites hushes. Devlin struts to the podium, tapping the microphone. He begins his speech. His voice booms with unearned magnetic confidence. He pitches his groundbreaking hurricane relief plan, throwing out my absurd illegal numbers with the fiery passion of a seasoned statesman. The applause never comes. The air in the room grows incredibly stiff. Wealthy donors exchange confused, alarmed glances. The governor's polite smile vanishes, replaced by a dark, furious scowl. Devlin keeps talking, completely oblivious to the shifting tide, riding the high of his own voice. Mid-sentence, the governor stands up. He steps toward the secondary microphone and cuts Devlin off. His deep voice echoes through the massive speakers, demanding to know where the senator found those ridiculous, highly illegal figures. He calls the entire proposal an insult to the state of Maryland. Devlin freezes. The arrogant flush drains completely from his face, leaving him ash white. Sweat beads on his forehead. He grips the edges of the podium so hard his knuckles turn yellow. The trap is sprung, but the cornered animal desperately tries to chew his way out. He leans into the microphone, forcing a sickeningly nervous laugh. He points a trembling finger straight into the back of the room, aiming directly at me. He tells the governor and the hundreds of elites staring at him that he relied on his wife for the raw data. He labels me a low-level federal desk worker who clearly botched the preliminary research. He throws me directly to the wolves, publicly sacrificing my entire reputation to salvage his shattered ego. 500 pairs of eyes shift away from the podium. They turn and lock directly onto me. The heavy silence stretched across the ballroom. The whispers began to rise. A sharp buzz of judgment. Devlin gripped the podium. A smug, desperate smirk pasted on his pale face. He waited for me to crumble. He expected me to lower my head, absorb his failure, and take the fall. The governor's microphone clicked back on. The sound snapped through the room like a gunshot. a low-level desk worker. The governor's voice dropped into a low, dangerous register. Senator, you are either a liar or a fool. The woman you are attempting to blame is the Senior Director of Crisis Management. She is the true architect of this state's relief effort. Devlin's jaw dropped. His smirk vanished, replaced by sheer, suffocating panic. The governor extended his hand toward me. Director, please join me on the stage. My heels clicked against the polished hardwood floor. The crowd parted instantly. I walked down the center aisle, my spine perfectly straight. As I moved closer to the podium, the governor's voice echoed overhead, tearing Devlin's lies to shreds. A brilliant mind who navigated this state through our darkest hour. You useless, smelly bureaucrat. Devlin's sneer from our hallway echoed in my skull. An unparalleled strategist who saved thousands of Maryland families. You cannot do anything right. You make me sick. His slurred, scotch-soaked voice bounced against the governor's praise. A leader of unmatched integrity. Without my last name, you are nothing. Every step I took crushed his gaslighting into dust. The contrasting words fueled my blood. I reached the podium. Devlin stood frozen, a pathetic, cornered animal. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his temple. His chest heaved in shallow, rapid jerks. He leaned toward me, his eyes wide, silently begging me to cover for him, to save his $500,000 donation, to shrink myself one last time. I stepped up to the secondary microphone. I turned my back to him. I faced the sea of wealthy donors. My voice remained dead calm, carrying absolute authority over the massive sound system. I surgically dismantled every single statistic he had just presented. I took the massive budget projection he boasted about and crushed it against actual federal allocation limits. I named the exact emergency statutes he claimed to leverage, exposing the glaring felony violations he had proudly declared just 10 minutes ago. I broke down the true logistics protocol, pulling back the curtain on his absolute fundamental incompetence. I proved to a room of powerful elites that their golden boy possessed the strategic intellect of a child. I laid his staggering ignorance bare for everyone to examine. A low murmur of absolute disgust rippled through the crowd. Devlin leaned in close to my shoulder. His voice dropped into a vicious, shaking hiss. "Shut your mouth, or I swear to God." I simply took a step to the right. I left him completely exposed. His threatening whisper caught on the hot microphone for the first 3 rows to hear. The wealthy donors physically recoiled, their faces twisted in pure contempt. The men who had laughed at his jokes 20 minutes ago now stared at him like he was a diseased rat. Devlin's political empire dissolved right in front of his eyes. There was no rage in my heart, only the cold, sharp satisfaction of dropping the match. I turned on my heel and walked down the steps. I marched down the carpeted stairs and headed straight for the exit. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung shut behind me, cutting off the suffocating whispers of the crowd. The grand corridor offered a brief second of quiet. Then the heavy brass handles violently burst open. Devlin charged into the hallway. His face was a twisted mask of unhinged fury. The polished, charming politician evaporated. The absolute monster was loose. He closed the distance between us in 3 frantic strides. His expensive leather shoes slapped aggressively against the marble floor. He backed me against the cold stone wall, trapping me. "You set me up," he snarled. Saliva flew from his lips, hitting my cheek. "You ruined me. I lost $500,000 because of your petty, jealous sabotage." He was hyperventilating. His chest heaved under his tailored suit. The loss of his money and his precious reputation stripped away every single ounce of his humanity. He raised his right hand high above his head, curling his manicured fingers into a tight, trembling fist. He aimed directly for my jaw. My spine pressed into the marble. I stared directly into his bloodshot eyes. I welcomed the strike. I wanted him to swing. "Do it, Devlin," I whispered. My voice remained perfectly steady, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Do it right now. Show them all exactly who you really are." I raised my hand and pointed a single finger over his left shoulder. Devlin froze. His fist hovered in the cold air. He slowly turned his head. The heavy oak doors stood wide open. The governor stood perfectly still in the entryway. A dozen high-profile donors clustered right behind him. 2 massive state troopers flanked the group. Every single pair of eyes was locked onto Devlin's raised fist. The silence in the corridor felt thick enough to choke on. The wealthy elites, the exact men Devlin worshipped and desperately wanted to impress, physically stepped backward. The sheer disgust twisting their faces was absolute. Then the rats began to flee. Devlin's sycophant campaign aides, the exact same cowards who sat at my dining room table and casually sipped their wine while my cheek bled, suddenly realised their own careers were on the chopping block. They shoved their way past the donors. The chief of staff, who used to laugh at Devlin's cruel jokes about my government job, literally sprinted toward the side exit. They desperately distanced themselves from the radioactive fallout. They abandoned their golden boy without a second thought. The men who enabled his violent abuse vanished into the shadows, leaving him entirely, terrifyingly alone. The state troopers stepped forward, their hands resting heavy on their utility belts. Devlin slowly lowered his trembling arm. His shoulders collapsed. The realization of his absolute financial and political ruin finally crashed down on him, buckling his knees. He looked back at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He searched my face for a lifeline, for the obedient wife who used to clean up his messes. He found nothing but empty air. I turned my back on him. I pushed the heavy glass exit doors open and stepped out into the crisp, cool Maryland night. The stifling, bruised reality of my marriage stayed trapped inside that building. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sharp, clean air of absolute freedom. Devlin lost his entire existence that night. The morning after the gala, the governor ordered a full audit of his campaign finances, and they found the rot immediately. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom and watched him stand before a judge, completely stripped of his expensive suits and his untouchable smile. He looked small. The judge sentenced him to 48 months in a federal penitentiary with no early parole, plus a $250,000 fine and $85,000 in full restitution. The government seized his luxury vehicles and drained his accounts. His wealthy donors vanished. Country clubs revoked his memberships. Even his sycophant aides, the cowards who watched my cheek bleed, were blacklisted from every political office in Maryland. High society erased Devlin like a bad memory. 8 months into his sentence, I received a handwritten letter stamped with a federal correctional facility seal, even behind bars. Devlin used the same manipulative tactics. He complained about freezing cells and disrespectful guards, then launched into the classic guilt trip. He claimed he only chased that $500,000 donation for us. He reminded me we took vows before God, demanding I help his lawyer file an appeal. A year earlier, that letter would have triggered a massive panic attack. I would have blamed myself for his misery, but standing in my sunlit kitchen, staring at his desperate handwriting, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, just a hollow indifference. I dropped the letter directly into the paper shredder. I listened to the sharp mechanical hum destroy his words, poured a cup of black coffee, and enjoyed the quiet morning. My life today looks nothing like the suffocating box I shared with Devlin. I stopped hiding my intellect to protect fragile men. Within 6 months, I became the Executive Director of National Emergency Response. I no longer write brilliant speeches for cowards. I command rooms full of professionals who deeply respect my voice. More importantly, I built a chosen family. I host loud, joyful dinners where no one walks on eggshells. There are no flying crystal glasses. I mentor young women, teaching them to anchor their worth in their competence, not their compliance. The air in my home is light, peaceful, and entirely mine. If you feel trapped in the shadow of someone else's fragile ego, listen closely. Devlin did not hate me because I was weak. He hated me because my strength reminded him of his own deep mediocrity. My fatal mistake was believing my sacrifice could cure his insecurity. I learned 3 vital rules through this trauma. Rule number 1, never amputate your own wings to make a worm feel like a dragon. When you shrink your talents to protect a fragile ego, they will never thank you. They will only resent you, because your existence reminds them of when they were small. Rule number 2, silence is a currency. The bystanders who sat at my table, watching me bleed without saying a word, were just as guilty as the man who threw the glass. If you sit at a table where abuse is served, you are complicit in the meal. Cowards do not deserve a single seat in your life. Rule number 3, true revenge is a mirror. You do not have to destroy an abuser to win. Just step completely out of their way. Stop fixing their mistakes. Remove your protective net, hold up a mirror, and let their own sheer incompetence be their executioner. How many of you are shrinking yourselves in a toxic relationship or job just to keep the peace? Ask yourself a hard question if the peace requires your daily destruction. Who is it really peaceful for? Share this story if you have ever had to walk away from someone who fed on your light. Share this if you are finally ready to take your power back. I am Elizabeth, and I am free.